Hello, this is the Lost Lake Run webinar series. The Lost Lake Run is a 16-mile mountain race that raises money for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. The Lost Lake Run is held the fourth Saturday of each August, and the 2020 Lost Lake Run will be held August 22nd. The Lost Lake Run webinar series invites a wide variety of speakers to talk about different aspects of trail running, training, nutrition, and also cystic fibrosis. For more information about the Lost Lake Run or the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, please see the notes below. I hope you enjoy this webinar. Well, good evening and welcome to the sixth webinar for the Lost Lake Run. We're fortunate today to have with us Claire Siekaniec. She's with Active Alaskan Nutrition, and we're going to talk about nutrition for runners this evening. So welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
I always like to start off with what I call the origin story. I guess my comic book background is taking the best of me, but how did you go from birth? Where were you born and raised? What kinds of things did you do? Were you active in sports? And then ultimately, where did you end up going to school and studying?
Okay. So I was born in a little town in North Dakota called Devil's Lake. And both my parents are from like that Midwestern region. And so we spent first 5 years of my life or so in that area, North Dakota, Wyoming. And then we moved up to Cold Bay, Alaska, which is out on the Aleutians, and spent about 3 years there. And I would say there, I was in like first, second, and third grade, and that was really a pretty fun time to spend out there. It's a small community, maybe like 100 people at the time. And so we had tons of freedom to be outdoors and playing with friends. So that was a really kind of cool experience and introduction to Alaska, really. And then after that, we spent a couple of years in Northern Virginia, and that's where I started to play sort of the more organized sports. And there I started playing soccer, and as we'll talk a little bit more about, that's kind of really the organized sport that I decided to kind of pursue a bit more. So then after Virginia, we moved to Homer, which is where I kind of claim as where I'm from, because that's kind of where I spent the majority of my time growing up. And there I played soccer year round, and then also started to participate in like basketball during high school, and did more of the outdoor activities of like hiking, backpacking during the summers and things like that. And then from there, I really, like I said, soccer was kind of my passion growing up. So I really decided like I wanted to play soccer in college. And so I kind of let that pull me in the direction of where to go to school. So I ended up going to a small school on the East Coast to play soccer primarily. And then I figured I'll figure out what I want to study at that time. So I did 4 years of school there, and I changed my major actually during my sophomore year to nutrition, because I started to realize there's a connection between what I could eat and what type of performance I would have playing soccer. And so that really kind of sparked my interest, and I like the science-y type classes more so than kind of like business. So that's kind of how I decided to study nutrition. Then after that, I continued with school, a little bit of time in between, but continued with school to study sports nutrition. I knew I wanted to kind of always be connected to athletes or just active people. That was a lifestyle that I had growing up and continue to have. And so that was kind of wanted to continue to have that interest in my career as well. And so I went to and got a graduate degree in sports nutrition.
So how long have you been in the field of nutrition since your master's degree?
So I've been a dietitian for, I think it's 7, almost 8 years or so. And to be a dietitian, so you go through that 4-year undergrad, and then there's a supervised practice hours that you have to do. So there's an internship of type. And so I actually did that here at UAA. And then it's after that that you can sit for your exam. So I've been a dietitian for about 7 or 8 years. And then after grad school, I took an exam to be a sports dietitian, and I've been a sports dietitian now for about 5 years.
Wow. Wow. You did a lot of soccer. Do you still play soccer now? Is that your primary activity?
Up until like a couple of years ago, it was. I recently, when I moved back to Anchorage in 2017, played a little bit, but then I've more recently kind of converted into coaching. And so I get a lot of my soccer activities now through coaching, and just, I don't play a lot myself. I just kind of do other exercises and workouts and things like that for my own physical activity.
Now, I had some kids that played soccer, and one of the coaches told me at one point, and I never did validate this, maybe you could, but the guys in the middle of the field, I guess they call them midfielders,
Mm-hmm.
right? They run up to like 5 miles a game. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. Definitely those midfielders are going back and forth. They're running the length of the field quite a bit. And so a game of soccer at the full level anyway is 90 minutes. And so over that time, yeah, there's some research to support that midfielders can be running like up to 5 miles.
So I would guess that if you were, I don't know what position you played, but if from a nutritional perspective, you maybe are kind of looking at the same kind of diet and nutrition as a runner would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, in terms of like nutrition and comparing that to soccer and running, soccer, you're getting a little bit more of the stop and go in there. Depending on the position, though, with those midfielders, it is a bit more constant, kind of like a runner's nutrition would need to be. But yeah, there are some similarities there, and especially for those players that do end up running quite a bit more than others.
Interesting. Now, I love doing these webinars because I'm learning about, like we had a physical therapist last week who recommended you, by the way. So that's how we came to learn about you. But I've never been to a physical therapist. I've never sat down in a session with it. So walk me through, for someone who's never been to a dietitian, especially a sports nutritionist, what would a session look like for someone who was, came in and met with you? What would that look like maybe the first time, and then how would that progress as you worked with them?
Yeah, so a typical session, first of all, usually lasts about an hour. And so that's me like collecting a lot of information first off of, nutrition plays into like your medical history too. So talking about a little bit about medical history, if there's been any sort of like diets or weight fluctuations, or kind of like a weight history as well, can be really helpful. So gathering a little bit of information on maybe just some past medical history, and then having the information about like a training plan that you're following or what type of activities you're partaking in now is really important to when I can look at like your energy expenditure. So how much energy you're requiring throughout the day doing the various activities that are included in your training, but then I also can use some estimates of what are you burning when you're sleeping? There's all these equations that help me estimate that type of stuff. So gathering that type of information. And then obviously talking about kind of like we call it like a 24-hour recall. So typically what I would ask for is just to think about the past day, like go through and tell me what you ate. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. Also, what are you drinking, to look at hydration. And then also the timing of that is really important. And especially what I'll look at is related to when the training might happen. So a lot of discussion about, what the times, what you're eating at what period of time throughout the day. That also can help with like determining or estimating. It's all kind of an estimation, but estimating, are you meeting your calories that you're burning every single day? And how does that work into the goals that you have? So if you have maybe some body composition goals that you want to work on, meaning maybe you're looking to gain some muscle, what does that look like with your activity and your nutrition? And then from there, it's kind of a lot of nutrition education and just talking about strategies and tips to help you meet those goals that you're looking for.
Now, there would seem to be some crossover. Like, for example, if you wanted to build strength or gain more muscle, you'd be probably looking at something that was hypertrophic versus just base strength, which doesn't necessarily need to be hypertrophic. You can be strong and be wiry. But I mean, do you develop a conditioning plan that goes with the diet plan, or do you pair up with someone? How do you handle the combination or crossover of those?
For the most part, I don't develop like an exercise plan. I would just kind of get as much detail as I can from someone about what their training looks like, and then be able to pair the nutrition to it. And so you kind of bring up a point there about kind of periodization. And so maybe, throughout the year, someone is looking at different sort of activities. And so how can the nutrition change along with those types of activities? So nutrition really can change a lot depending on what activity and what goals are happening throughout the year.
So let me ask you about some basic definitions, and then I've got kind of a series of questions to follow. But I've heard this term macros. What is a macro?
Yes, so macro refers to actually a longer word is macronutrients. And macronutrients are energy providing nutrients that are needed in large quantities by the body. And so macronutrients are carbohydrates, protein, and fat. That's kind of like the most basic definition. And that's what people, when they say like they're counting macros, or you hear kind of like on MyFitnessPal, you figure out your macros. That's what it's referring to, is like a distribution of how much carbohydrate you should have, how much protein, and how much fat.
So when you're designing a plan with someone, do you give them a macro list, or this is how much you take of each, and here's when you should take it?
Yeah, I can. So what I look at first and foremost usually is looking at your energy expenditure, and this is an estimate again. So that's where I've gathered all that information, and I'm able to make an estimate on you are needing, let's just say 2,000 calories a day. And then break that down from there to say what those calories look like. And so that can be, there's ranges. So it could be, maybe it's like 50% carbohydrate, 20% protein, 30% fat. And then there's ranges all around that that manipulate a little bit based on what the goals are. So for someone that's a runner specifically, a macronutrient range that I would probably lean a little bit towards is a little bit higher on the carbohydrate range, because that's the nutrient that provides the most energy. And so carbohydrates really are the basis of the diet. And so I would probably lean towards a higher range in carbohydrate.
Interesting. So you might do a 50-30-20 plan for someone that's a runner, or would it be like a 60-20-20 plan?
Yeah, I think it could be like a 60-20-20 could be. It's not, that would be like a pretty reasonable plan. And it also can vary a little bit depending on people's like preferences too. So people may follow that and be like, this isn't working for me, or, and so we may have to manipulate those ranges a little bit throughout too.
So I lift weights. I try to build my body up. It's a goal of mine. So it's very different than running. But I spend a lot of time trying to figure out when is the best time to eat relative to training. So let's put that in the framework of a runner. If you're going to do a run, when's the best time to eat? Should you eat before, half hour before? And should you alter the composition of that food so that maybe it's more carbohydrate for energy, or should it be more protein and fat for sustainable energy? Or should you eat when you get home?
Yeah. So typically when you're thinking about like your pre-workout meals, it's recommended like 3 to 4 hours beforehand, you would have a full meal. So that's kind of just like your normal meal. And then that can be, ideally, it would be balanced with like carbohydrate, protein, fat. And then working closer to your workout, then like within 1 to 2 hours, you can have a snack. And that's where you are leaning more towards choosing those easy to digest carbohydrates. It's still okay to have some protein, some fat at that point in time, because you're likely going to digest it and it's not going to be sitting in your stomach, as long as you're not eating too much quantity. And then the closer you get to that workout or that run, that's when you really want to pay attention to choosing more, pretty much just carbohydrate. And it can even be easier to digest carbohydrates. And by that, I mean maybe things like a bagel or a banana or like graham crackers, things like that that really digest quickly and provide you with that energy right away.
How about fruit juice, which is, you know, high sugar content, those types of things? Would you recommend those kinds of things?
I think fruit juice can sometimes lead to an upset stomach and just like gastrointestinal problems. So if that were a part of the like meal or the snack, that might be okay. But right beforehand, that might be something that's really individualized, but it wouldn't be my first thing to recommend just because of that concern that it might cause some gastrointestinal distress. But fruit, like a whole fruit, that's going to be a little bit of a better option just because I don't think it would go through you so fast to cause something like diarrhea, for example. But something like dried fruit might also be a better choice. Whole fruit, dried fruit. I think it's just the fruit juice that might go a little bit too quick almost.
So what I'm hearing you say is not all fats, proteins, and carbs are equal. I couldn't pull out a Snickers bar, you know, and I look at it and go, oh, hey, it's got all my macros. I'll eat the Snickers bar versus maybe having sweet potatoes and some kind of white meat chicken or something.
Yeah. So definitely there's different types of foods within those macronutrient categories. And so one thing that I just referenced was like easy to digest carbohydrates. And one other way to think about that, there's complex carbohydrates, which are those ones that are more like whole grains. So let's just do the comparison of like brown rice. That's a complex carbohydrate, has fiber in it. It's in it more in its natural state. It's going to be slower to digest. The simple carbohydrates, let's say it's white rice, the fiber has been like removed. It's mostly just starch and it's going to digest and break down in your system really quickly. So that's one difference in that group. And then within the other macronutrients, there's definitely differences. I'm sure people have heard of like saturated fat and unsaturated fat. So saturated fats are more so, it's recommended to limit those ones because those are the ones that can lead to like increased cholesterol, for example. And so the unsaturated fats are going to be the healthier fats that we want to choose more of more often. So yeah, within those categories, there are foods that have a little bit of a different nutrient profile. And then when you're thinking too about choosing foods, so like for example, a Snickers bar, it does have all those macronutrients in there, but when you think about that compared to sweet potato and chicken, maybe the macronutrients are similar. So you're getting the same amount of protein and the same amount of fat, but are they as nutritious? And so there's maybe other nutrients that you're getting from the chicken and the sweet potato that you're not getting from that Snickers bar.
Now, forgive me for dodging around a little bit, but one of the things that comes to mind is supplementation. So if you've got a properly formed diet, is there still a room for supplementation, for example, omega-3s or vitamin C or vitamin D during the winter when we seem to be vitamin D deficient? What's your thought on supplementation? Should you create a diet that doesn't require supplements, or is supplements a part of a balanced diet?
Yeah, I think that in general, I recommend creating a diet that doesn't require supplements. In general, getting the nutrients that you can from whole food is going to be best. And then, you know, as Alaskans, we know here vitamin D can be really difficult to get in the winter because of the sun. And then the vitamin D is just also not found in a lot of foods. So for example, there's like some salmon has a good amount, eggs, mushroom, and kind of once you leave those foods, there's just not a lot that supply vitamin D. And so sometimes vitamin D supplements may be necessary for some people, but vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and so that means your body can store it. So I do recommend people get their vitamin D levels tested, and then they can supplement with the right amount.
So do you, as a part of your practice, do blood work and look at blood levels?
No, I can't do blood work. That would be something to do through a physician, but it can be something that, you know, we can talk about, like recommendations for blood work. And then the supplementing too, like your physician can recommend an amount that would be supplemented. And also some of these supplements can be a prescription supplement too. And so that is also kind of brings up a point of the other point of supplements. One of the reasons that I really recommend getting the nutrients from food is that supplements are not regulated by the FDA. And so if the supplement manufacturer doesn't go through a third-party testing, it's really impossible to actually know what's in that supplement. Even though the labels may say it has this, this, and this, it's not regulated. So
yeah, interesting. We've talked a little bit about kind of the nutritional needs, if you will, of a runner. Now, how does that differ from, say, a non-runner? Does that diet vary tremendously?
Yeah, I think that the overall basis does not necessarily vary a lot. So for just in general, all of this is just in general recommendations, but when you're thinking about what's a healthy diet for a runner and what's a healthy diet for someone maybe who's not even active, it can be very similar. But what the big differences come in, and especially when you have longer training or longer races, is the total amount of energy that someone may need, so those calories. And then also there are a few nutrients that, like iron, for example. Some runners may find that over time they have like a low iron level. And so there are a few specific nutrients like that that may warrant extra attention for a runner rather than someone who's not active.
And then thinking about, we talked a little bit about complex and simple carbs. What types of proteins would you recommend? Do you think it's better to get your protein from fish or chicken, and give me some kind of guidance in terms of that side of the macro?
Yeah, so protein, I like kind of just overall, when you're thinking about protein, there's plant-based proteins and then there's also animal-based proteins. And so I think it's important to try to incorporate both of those. Some people do choose to, say, be vegetarian, and that's fine. But just in general, being able to choose a variety of proteins, I think, is beneficial. And one thing to think about, especially with like the animal-based proteins, is that animal proteins also come often with fat, and a lot of that fat is a saturated fat. And so being able to choose lean protein, animal protein options, I think that that's important, is to try and pay attention a little bit to that fat content there, and choosing leaner options. And then we know that like fish, for example, salmon has the omega-3s in there. And so that's actually going to be a healthy fat. So yeah, I think like fish, seafood, the leaner animal proteins, and then also incorporating those plant-based proteins. So things like beans, soy products like tofu or tempeh, quinoa, you get some protein from whole grains and things like that. So I think being able to kind of just have balance in all of that is like good options for protein.
Mm-hmm. Now, I had read an article one time that when you're training a muscle, it adapts fairly quickly. So if you do the same thing over and over again, initially you'll get some benefit from it, but as time progresses, you lose the benefit of that. Your body adapts. So you have to modify whatever you're doing to put more strain or stress or tension on the muscle to make it adapt. Well, is the same thing true for your diet? If you ate the same things day after day, does your digestive system kind of adapt to that, and then maybe it's not doing the same as it would initially, and then by keeping a diverse diet, you're forcing your digestive system to kind of always, kind of keep up with what you're eating?
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, I think that like variety overall is really important. So variety, it ensures that you're getting all of the nutrients that your body needs. So if we just ate the same thing day after day after day, eventually we may become deficient in a certain nutrient because it's not in those select foods that we eat every single day. So variety overall is just really important so that you're ensuring all of those like micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals, making sure that you're getting all of those types of nutrients as well. And then there is some times where changing up a nutrition strategy can benefit. So I think like if, for example, we'll just use like weight loss. Some people can follow a certain like dietary pattern for a while, lose weight on it, and then kind of plateau. And that's where maybe like a change in what the nutrition looks like can help them move on from that too. So yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons why variety can be really important.
Yeah, and I'm sure everybody's met that plateau at some point in their life in weight loss. Yeah, and they seem to be very long plateaus for some reason. So let me kind of talk to you a little bit about various types of diets. We hear about the Mediterranean diet and the paleo diet, but one that's really, I think, got a lot of attention recently is the keto diet. What is a keto diet, and you know, is it something as a nutritionist you recommend?
Yeah, so the keto diet stands for ketogenic. And what the history of the ketogenic diet is that it was developed to help patients with epilepsy. And so what it is an extremely low carbohydrate diet. And so primarily you're eating just fat. And then it has a little bit of protein and like very, very minimal carbohydrate. And the thought process or the process that's going on is that you're getting rid of all those carbohydrate stores in your body so that you use fat instead of carbohydrate. And so it has been really popular recently. And I think that most of the research that's out there is for like weight loss. And so with a ketogenic diet, and especially for people that are active, I don't recommend it because when you don't have any of that carbohydrate going into your body and you're using the ketones that are made from the fatty acids as energy, it's like a really, it's a different process where you're not going to be able to get the results that you want or train at a high intensity or be able to go hard for a long period of time. That's what carbohydrates do, is they enable you to like go harder. Fat is good for that long term, but at a like slower or lower intensity. And so for someone who is working to increase maybe their times or their distance, I would not recommend a ketogenic diet for that. And, someone who is following a ketogenic diet, they might see that they do lose weight. Carbohydrates, they store water with them. And so when you get rid of carbohydrates, a lot of water goes with it. And so you'll notice an initial decrease in weight. And then thinking about the sustainability of it is a big part too. How can you sustain eating such a high fat diet? And what are the choices of fats that you're eating? I don't think that there is the long-term research out there for us to be able to say, oh, the ketogenic diet is healthy for, let's say, your heart to follow for however many years. So the sustainability of it is another thing I like to question. And that goes for any diet. Do you see yourself following that for a long period of time? Is it easy for you? Is it comfortable? Does it make you feel good? So those are all questions that I would kind of just inquire with someone when they are talking about keto or any other type of fad diet.
Along that same line, there's also this notion of fasting or intermittent fasting, where a good portion of your day you don't have any food. So maybe I've heard of people who they'll eat for 8 hours and then the remaining 16 they won't, which would be an intermittent fast. Or one day a week they don't eat anything for a 24-hour period of time. What is your thoughts on the value of fasting, and if it is something that's good, what's the best approach to use it?
Yeah, so I think that fasting, and like you said, intermittent fasting, there's a bunch of different sort of ways that people can do it. And I think that and again, this has kind of been more so researched for weight loss at this time. And so, when you control a period of time that you're eating, and let's say it is like just that 8-hour window of time during the day that you eat, if that's less than what you did before, you may overall eat less calories, and that can help stimulate weight loss on itself, no matter what you're choosing. And so with someone who may be interested in like intermittent fasting, I would really encourage them to think about their training times and when they're training and how and what they're eating around it. Because if you do want to, if you do have certain goals that do include like improving your time, distance, building muscle, things like that, the timing of your nutrition becomes really, really important. And if you're doing a workout that isn't supported then afterwards by nutrition, you might not be seeing those gains that you may want. There is a little bit of research showing that maybe there's improved cholesterol levels with some form of fasting. So I think there's a lot out there yet for us to learn about fasting. But for someone who is active, working out, I would encourage them to fuel around those workouts appropriately. And whether that is something that can be done in 8 hours, maybe. But if it's, if you're not seeing any changes of those changes that you desire, then maybe the intermittent fasting isn't the right option there. So, I think for all of these types of diets, there's, it may work for one thing, it may not work for another. There's also differences in, like gender. Maybe this works better for males and maybe something else works better for females. So kind of as I'm talking about all this, one thing that's really important to remember is that nutrition is very individualized. And so what works for one person might not work for another.
Now, along that line, if somebody comes to you and you develop a plan, what are the time frames for you to kind of measure the progress in that plan, and when do you decide to make adjustments, and do I follow your nutritional plan for a week and then check in, or is it a month and then check in? What's the time frame for these kind of things?
So usually it's a little bit, I would say like a month gives you a pretty good amount of time to figure out, one, how things are going for you. If you've made significant nutrition changes, like, are you having trouble following them? Do you have questions? What's going on? What's working well? What's not? A month is a pretty good amount of time to do that. And also see changes if you are following those recommendations and you've done everything. That does allow you enough time to start seeing some changes. Anything before a month, you may be able to see a little bit of fluctuation a couple of weeks out, but it would be a little bit harder to say like, yes, that was because of your nutrition changes or whatever else is going on too. But a month, you can really kind of get to see some consistency even from like the 4 weeks then. So I would say like, if you're looking to either gain or lose weight, losing weight, it's not recommended to lose more than like 2 pounds in a week. That's healthy weight loss. And so that's the type of change that, in 4 weeks, you can definitely tell. And then when you're also gaining, over 4 weeks, you would be able to see a difference too. And then after that, it's, if someone had a bunch of questions or something like that, checking in before 4 weeks would be completely fine. It may just not be enough to really evaluate any significant changes. And then after that, it kind of varies for people on how much, if they need like to check in to keep accountable, or if they're progressing onto a different type of training and there's some manipulations that need to happen for that. So it kind of is individualized, but in terms of actually seeing progress, I would say a month minimum probably.
So this issue of compliance seems to be one that always pops up, whether you're training for strength or training running, and having accountability where you, especially if that's something you recognize as something that you're not strong in, it seems to be something that helps. Do you sometimes have people send you what they've eaten and then check in just so that you create accountability so they kind of stay on track?
Yeah. I think that is it's often a pretty big thing for people when they're making those nutrition changes is, that can be a pretty significant change for some people. And so being able to be held accountable is really what helps that long-term change be a success. And so, yeah, sometimes checking in, doing like a food diary, checking in on what people have been eating, or like I've used MyFitnessPal in the past with being able to, I mean, it's just inputting to see, kind of get a general idea of calories or macronutrients or things like that. So looking at the diet in one way or another, I think it definitely helps people to be accountable, but also if people know that they're going to be sending what they're eating to a dietitian, it may change the way they eat in that period of time anyway. So there's a little bit of both ways.
And I don't see it as a negative. I actually see that as there's someone there that is helping you. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you know that you, at the end of the week, you're going to send everything you ate to, you know, your dietitian, I think it helps you because it says, you know, I'm accountable to this person as well as myself. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it maybe can get you over that rough spot.
Yeah.
You know, and I love to eat, so I've got a lot of rough spots. And so having that accountability helps me.
Yeah.
My accountability is a spreadsheet. So I when I'm trying to do something like you're doing, I'll put it down, and then at the end of the day, I'll add up the calories and the macros, and I'll go, oh, well.
Mm-hmm.
But for everybody, it's different, and I think that really does help.
Yeah.
You also we talked about how important it is to have your nutrition kind of matching your workouts. How about intra workout? What should we and how does that vary depending on what we're doing? So we have the Lost Lake Run. It's a 16-mile run, and some days it's really warm up there, and it's a rigorous course. I mean, anybody who does it, walk, run, I mean, I am amazed. That is a difficult course, and it's 15.7 miles, but it is rough. So you've got to be, you know, on top of your game. So what kinds of things should we bring along nutrition-wise to make sure that we keep our energy levels kind of consistent or high?
Yeah. So for workouts that are lasting, you know, over an hour, 90 minutes or so, which is probably going to be this run, you definitely want to bring some type of fuel or energy with you. And so that is something that, again, is very individualized what people want, but primarily the recommendations are going to be those easy to digest carbohydrates. You don't necessarily want things with a lot of fat or protein because those are things that slow down digestion. So it's going to slow down the release of that energy. And it's also going to sit in your stomach. So you might feel a little bit heavy, weighed down, or have an upset stomach from it. So those simple to digest carbohydrates, and that's often where those like sport nutrition type foods come into play. So maybe like the shot block type things or those gels. But you can also like use whole food type things. So some people will make like little rice cakes, or, you know, there's recipe books out there for homemade sports nutrition products. So I would definitely encourage people to bring some type of fuel with them, and also to know that it's something that they like the taste of, they've tried it before, they know it's not going to upset their stomach, and it's going to be something that is going to support their run. So other like simple to digest, and it's also, you know, sometimes when you're running, it's a little bit hard in that to eat. And so that's where some of those like gels are a little bit easier for that reason. But things like pretzels or applesauce, you know, like crackers, even those like jelly bean type things, those are all good fueling options for during a race or run or event. And then hydration is also a big part for a long run, and especially if it's hot and humid. So making sure to have some type of hydration to be able to support you through the entire length. And that too is where some fuel can come into play. So sports drinks are designed for carbohydrate and electrolyte replacement. So they have some sugar in there for some energy. And so that can also be utilized as a way to get some energy in. It may not be enough to support your overall like carbohydrate needs, in terms of you may have to drink too much of it that you're overhydrating yourself. So there is a little bit of a balance there, and something to figure out definitely before you do a race rather than during it.
Mm-hmm. And we, for the Lost Lake Run, we provide water station at the top.
Oh, good.
And we have two different ways in which they can get water. One is we just have small cups that they could drink if they want, but we also have a location for where water can be added to their Camelback or to their jug. So, and then we also provide Gatorade because now you use the word electrolyte. I've heard that. I've used it myself, like I know what it means. I have no idea what an electrolyte is. What are electrolytes and why do we need them?
Yeah, so electrolytes are minerals like sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, calcium, so all of those that I just named can be found in food. And so we eat a lot of those electrolytes throughout the day. But when we're working out, sweat is that is the primary way that you're losing electrolytes when you are working out, is through sweat. And so sodium is really the one that is talked about most because that's highest concentration of electrolytes in your sweat. So the role of electrolytes, they help to maintain fluid balance. They help with contracting muscles. So they have they have tons of different roles in the body, but specifically when you're thinking about exercise, those are a couple of the roles that they play. So they are important. Sports drinks have, and there's electrolyte beverages and other types of things out there, but they have electrolytes in them designed to help replace the ones that are being lost through sweat. However, since everyone's different and their sweat rate may be different, or if it's really hot and humid out and you're sweating more than you do when it's a nice day out like this, that can also impact how much you're losing and how much you need to replace. So that is something that's pretty variable, but it is also an important part to think about when you are making kind of a race day strategy.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody who is doing the Lost Lake Run to do it if they haven't done it yet on their own, just to kind of get a sense of where do you get hungry, where do you get thirsty, did I bring enough, did I bring too much, and just kind of get a gauge on just some of those simpler things. But yeah, I think it's really valuable. So for all you Lost Lake runners, yeah, I think it would be great to get out on the trail at least once before you actually hit race day if you can. It's a hike. You got to get all the way down to Seward, and you got to figure out where you're going to get the car, and it's not easy. I understand that, but boy, I sure encourage people to do that.
Yeah,
beautiful trail.
And that is one of the most common. That is the recommendation too for sports nutrition is have a plan and figure this type of stuff out before you go into that race day. You never want to try something new on race day. And so if you can head out to that trail before and give it all a try, you really get a good idea for yourself of what you said exactly. When do you get hungry? What can you bring? Did you feel good when you ate that? You get to experiment a little bit by trying out before the actual day.
Yeah, good. So if someone wants to engage your services, I'd like to be able to, in the Facebook posts that follow, and also in the YouTube messages, I want to leave your contact information. So please send that to me when we're done. But if someone's interested in getting that assessment from you, or learning more about how maybe nutrition can make a big difference, I guess when I'm thinking about things, I'm usually thinking about the perspective from what I exercise. But like I said, I like to build muscle. So when I listen to people who built a lot of muscle, they kind of say these are the three things you need to do. You need to sleep, you need to eat right, and then you need to exercise correctly. And that's with the right type of intensity and the plan and all those other things. But it's in that order. Sleep is really critical, and then nutrition, absolutely. So for someone who maybe hasn't really paid a lot of attention to their nutrition, what would you think would be some of the benefits they might see from changing their diet to be more specific to their activity?
Yeah, so I think if they maybe even just their pattern of eating isn't supporting their activity, I think that if they made some changes around that, they might experience being able to just kind of have a feeling of more energy during their run, recovering quicker. So maybe they can get back to that, long run followed by an activity the next day might feel a little bit better there because the recovery is better. And then I'm really glad you brought up sleep, because sleep is so important. And it's even, if you don't get enough sleep, you make changes in your nutrition and it may not make a difference because the sleep is working against it. So sleep is really, really important. And especially when you know, I know, you know, some people can't find the time to sleep the recommended number of hours, but that is a big area that, you know, I'm not a sleep expert, but that it's worth mentioning too, and even in a nutrition consult, is to try to get, you know, that's like 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night to be able to support activity, recovery, all of those aspects that we've been talking about.
Yeah. It's good to hear that you agree with that. That means that I'm not completely listening to the wrong people. So as we wrap up, I always like to ask our guests, what would be the take-home message you'd like to give the people that have watched the webinar? What do you think is like the important thing or things that you'd like them to carry away? Yeah,
so I think that what's important for nutrition is to find things that work for you. And so I mentioned this earlier, but like what works for one person isn't going to work for everyone. And so really being able to find that dietary pattern that is sustainable and it makes you feel good. And, you know, sometimes, you know, like we didn't necessarily talk about this, but like, you know, like clean eating or something, you know, people try to restrict added sugar, let's say. But that may lead to feelings of wanting too much of it, or, you know, cravings for it later. So being able to include foods that you enjoy is also really important. And so figuring out what type of balance and what is going to work in the long run to support you in your health and both your training goals too. So really, I think it's just all about finding that dietary pattern that works for you.
Well, I sure appreciate, I've learned a lot today, and I think those folks that are Lost Lake runners and they're paying attention to this, I think all of these pieces that we talk about are really critical. We talk about physical therapy, we talk about yoga and stretching and mobility, we talk about strength training, which Steph Figarelli did, and we talk about nutrition, because all these things play together. They have to work together. And I so appreciate your time today to tell us about the nutritional component of this. So thank you. And if you ever decide to do the Lost Lake Run, we'd love to see you out there in August.
It's one of my favorite hikes to do. So someday, hopefully I can participate in the run too.
We do have a walking category. So
Great.
Yeah, you don't have to run it.
Yeah, I think it would be fun to try and run it someday. I don't necessarily classify myself as a runner, but I do enjoy getting out there and running, and especially, you know, when the scenery is like Lost Lake, it's amazing. So
yeah, thank you, Claire. Have a great day.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.